You think the past is gone, you picture it as something left behind, used up, finished. You imagine time as a conveyor belt, you standing on the front edge, the past falling off the back. You think yesterday no longer exists, that it dissolved, that it vanished. This is a comforting picture. It lets you believe mistakes are erased. That causes stop causing. That history stays politely behind you, but that picture is doing a lot of work for you. And it's wrong. You don't actually know the past is gone. You assume it is, because your memory fades, because your clocks only point one way. You confuse forgetting with disappearance. You confuse motion with erasure. You confuse experience with reality. Past doesn't feel present, so you decide it isn't. That conclusion is not based on physics. It's based on habit, on language, on the way your mind likes stories with endings. And Richard Feynman had very little patience for stories like that. When you say the past is gone, you rarely notice what you're comparing it to. Gone compared to where? Gone compared to what? You speak as if the universe has a trash bin, as if yesterday was used and discarded, as if events expire. But physics never points to a place where the past goes. You don't observe it leaving. You don't measure it dissolving. You don't detect a boundary where reality ends and absence begins. You simply stop experiencing it. And you quietly promote that personal limit into a law of nature. This is a mistake. Gone is not a physical description. It's a psychological one. It describes access, not existence. If you drop a glass and it shatters, you don't say the glass is gone. You say it has changed form. The pieces are still there. The atoms are still doing what atoms do. But when an event finishes, you treat it differently. You grant it a special privilege. You allow it to vanish completely. Why? Because you cannot point to it anymore. You cannot step back into it. You cannot interact with it the way you interact with objects. So you declare it unreal. This is where language starts lying for you. You talk about the past as if it were a thing that once occupied space, as if it could pack up and leave, as if it had mass, volume, and exit route. But an event is not an object. It does not need storage. It does not require persistence in the way matter does. Physics describes events as relations. This happened relative to that. This followed from that. Nothing in that description contains a deletion step. And Richard Feynman was allergic to invented steps, especially comforting ones. He would ask, where exactly does this gone occur? At what coordinate? By what mechanism? You don't have answers. Not because they're complicated, but because you never needed them. Your intuition did the work for you. You imagine time as a line with an eraser moving across it. Past erased, present drawn, future blank. But that eraser exists only in your head. The equations don't include it. The measurements don't reveal it. The universe does not pause to clean up behind itself. What actually disappears is your ability to intervene, your ability to change, your ability to interfere. And that loss feels like non-existence. It feels final. But feeling final is not the same as being erased. When Feynman warned against asking the wrong questions, this is what he meant. Where did the past go? Assumes it had somewhere to go in the first place. Physics never agreed to that assumption. You just stop noticing. You trust clocks more than you realize. You let them decide what is real. When the second hand moves, you feel something being left behind. When the date changes, you feel a clean break, a boundary, an ending. But a clock does not witness disappearance. It never has. A clock is a machine that changes state in a regular way. That's all. It doesn't know what came before. Doesn't remove anything after. When a pendulum swings, nothing is deleted on the backward arc. When a crystal vibrates, it doesn't discard the previous vibration. When an atomic clock ticks, it doesn't shred the universe behind it. It just changes. You look at that change and imagine subtraction. But no subtraction is occurring. This is where intuition quietly inserts causation. You feel that because clocks advance, moments must retreat. That forward motion requires backward erasure. Physics does not make that trade. The equations that describe motion through time are indifferent to your sense of flow. They relate states, earlier and later, not present and absent. Nothing in them says, remove all prior states. If clocks actually erase the past, you would expect consequences. You would expect conservation laws to fail. You would expect causes to lose their causes. But that never happens. The universe remains stubbornly consistent. Effects carry fingerprints of what came before. Trajectories remember. Particles collide as if history still matters, because it does. What a clock really does is limit you. It tells you when your opportunity to act has passed, when your ability to intervene has ended. That loss of agency is powerful. It feels like destruction. You confuse, I can't change this anymore, with this no longer exists. Feynman was careful about this distinction. He trusted instruments, but he distrusted the stories people told about them. A clock does not declare reality. It reports correlation. When two events are separated by a measured interval, the clock records that relation. It does not comment on the ontological status of the earlier event, but your language does. You say the time is over. You say it has passed. You say it is behind you. All spatial metaphors, all borrowed from motion in space, none licensed by physics. You would never say a location ceases to exist because you walked past it. But you say that about moments without hesitation. That habit is not scientific, it's cultural. And once you notice that, the clock loses its authority. It no longer feels like a judge, just a counter. Counting does not destroy what it counts. You rely on memory as if it were a measuring device. When it fades, you take that fading seriously, too seriously. You assume that because the past becomes harder to recall, it must be slipping away. That reality weakens as memory weakens. That forgetting is a kind of proof. It is. Memory is not a record of the world. It is a biological process that constantly edits itself. It compresses. It distorts. It deletes without asking permission. If memory were evidence of existence, then dreams would be real and childhood would be mostly fiction. But you don't believe that. Not consistently. You already know memory is unreliable. You just forget that when thinking about time. When yesterday feels faint, you assume yesterday itself has faded. You mistake access for ontology. Again, Feynman was explicit about this kind of error. He warned against using human convenience as a guide to physical truth. Your brain evolved to survive, not to archive the universe. The decay of memory tells you something very specific. It tells you about neurons, about chemistry, about biological cost. It tells you nothing about whether an event has ceased to exist in any meaningful physical sense. And yet you treat memory loss as disappearance because it feels like disappearance. The emotional texture is the same. The absence is personal. This is where intuition becomes aggressive. It insists that what cannot be revisited is no longer real, that what cannot be recalled is no longer there. But physics never uses recall as a criterion. An electron does not forget its interaction history. A molecule does not misremember its last collision. A trajectory is not optional. The universe does not consult your hippocampus before continuing. Every physical interaction leaves traces, not memories, traces. The problem is that you don't have access to them, not because they aren't there, but because they are dispersed, scrambled, and beyond your scale, so your mind fills in the gap. It declares the past gone because that is simpler than admitting ignorance. Feynman preferred ignorance. He trusted it more. To say, I don't know what the past is uncomfortable. To say the past is gone feels decisive, final, clean. But clean answers are often false ones. When memory fails, you lose representation, not reality. You lose a handle, not the object. Physics makes this distinction constantly. You are the one who keeps erasing it. And once you start using memory as evidence, The past becomes harder to dismiss, not because you can point to it, but because you can no longer justify deleting it. You imagine the universe as forgetful, as if it moves on the way you do, letting go, cleaning up after itself. This is wrong. The universe is relentlessly conservative. It hoards information. Every interaction leaves a mark, not a memory, a consequence. When two particles collide, they don't just bounce and forget. Their trajectories change. Their internal states shift. Their surroundings absorb the difference. That difference does not evaporate. It spreads. This is not philosophy. It's bookkeeping. Physics is built on the refusal to allow effects without causes and causes without consequences. That refusal forces the universe to carry its history forward, whether you track it or not. You never see a system reset itself. You only see systems you've stopped monitoring. The air in a room remembers every conversation ever spoken there. Not in words, in motion, in pressure waves that became heat. In microscopic rearrangements, you can no longer reverse. You call that lost. Physics calls it distributed. This is where discomfort begins. If the past were truly gone, causation would be optional. The present could exist without obligation, but it never does. The present is shaped, constrained, and biased by what came before, not metaphorically, physically. Feynman liked to remind students that nature does not care about human categories. Information, history, record, these are your labels. The universe just obeys rules. And those rules do not include erasure. You might object, entropy increases, order dissolves. Surely that means the past disappears. It does T. Entropy does not destroy information. It hides it. It makes it harder to reconstruct, harder for you. The universe still has it, just not in a form you can easily recognize. This is where intuition collapses. You equate irreversibility with non-existence. But irreversibility only means you cannot go back the way you came. You can unmix milk from coffee. That doesn't mean the milk is gone. You can reconstruct yesterday from today. That doesn't mean yesterday was erased. It means the universe does not privilege reconstruction. It moves forward carrying everything, just increasingly scrambled. The past is not preserved neatly. It is preserved brutally, without compression, without concern for your ability to read it. And that is worse than erasure, because it means nothing is ever cleanly finished. Nothing is fully over. Everything leaves a residue. Once you accept that, the idea of a vanished past starts to sound naive, not comforting. You treat the present as special, as a razor-thin slice where reality happens. Everything else, you think, is either gone or not yet real. This feels obvious. It feels unavoidable. Physics disagrees by omission. When physicists write down laws, they do not circle a moment and label it now. They relate events. This one before that, this one after, but never this one is real, the others are not. There is no equation with a glowing arrow pointing to the present, no variable that means current moment, no term that means everything else has expired. That absence matters. If the present were a fundamental feature of reality, physics would need it. It does T. This is deeply unsettling if you notice it, because your entire sense of being rests on the idea that now is where existence happens, that you are standing on the edge of time as it advances. But the universe does not acknowledge that edge. Events are ordered, not privileged. Earlier and later exist in relation to each other, not in competition for reality. Feynman was careful here. He never declared the past real in a metaphysical sense. But he refused to declare it unreal either, because physics does not supply the authority to make that claim. The present is something you experience, not something the universe advertises. And that distinction is uncomfortable. You want now to be special because it explains why you feel located, why you feel present, why everything seems to arrive then leave, but feelings are not coordinates. From a physical perspective, all events are just points in a structure, linked, constrained. consistent. You move through that structure in one direction, carrying memory and agency with you. That movement feels like reality switching on and off. It isn't. The switch is inside you. This is why attempts to define the present always collapse into psychology, into perception, into consciousness. Physics steps back and stays silent. And in that silence, a dangerous assumption slips in. You decide that what is not present is absent. But the equations never said that. They simply refuse to choose. Once you realize physics does not endorse now, the idea of the past being over loses its footing. Not because the past is somehow active, but because the present was never crowned king to begin with. Richard Feynman was suspicious of conclusions that felt too neat, especially conclusions that made people comfortable. He distrusted statements that sounded like the universe had wrapped something up, finished it, closed the book. The past is gone sounds like one of those statements. It feels decisive. It feels like an answer. But Feynman would ask what it's answering for. Physics, as he practiced it, was not in the business of declaring what isn't real. Only what can be predicted, what can be related, what can be tested. And there is a quiet difference between those things. You can say where a particle will likely be. You can say how systems evolve. You can say what follows from what. You cannot, from inside the equations, point at an event and say, this no longer exists. That sentence is doing philosophical work, not physical work. Feynman didn't reject philosophy. He rejected pretending philosophy was physics when students asked him what time really is. He resisted the trap, not because the question was foolish, but because pretending to have a clean answer would be, he was comfortable leaving questions open, unresolved, unfinished. This matters because certainty is often smuggled in where physics stays neutral. When you say the past is gone, you are making a strong ontological claim. You are asserting a feature reality, not a limitation of knowledge. Physics never authorized that move. It simply stops talking. It tells you how states relate. It tells you how information spreads. It tells you why reconstruction is hard. And then it goes quiet. That silence is not agreement. It's restraint. Feynman understood that restraint was a strength. It kept physics honest. It prevented human preference from turning into cosmic law. You want the past to be gone because it simplifies causation, because it lets you imagine clean breaks, because it makes identity feel manageable. But the universe does not share those preferences. Feynman's genius was not in replacing one comforting story with another. It was in refusing to close questions prematurely. The past is gone is a closed question. It feels finished. Physics does not finish it. And when a discipline as ruthless as physics refuses to conclude, that refusal itself is information. It tells you where certainty ends and where your intuitions have been doing the talking instead. If the past hasn't really gone away, then something about you becomes unstable. You like to think of yourself as standing on a clean edge, defined by what is happening now, loosely connected to what came before. That picture depends on disappearance. If yesterday is truly over, then you are free of it in a deep sense. Its mistakes are sealed. Its causes are finished. But if the past is not erased, only inaccessible, then you are not standing at an edge. You are inside a structure. Your body is not just influenced by what happened. It is configured by it. Every motion you make is constrained by conditions you did not choose and cannot remove. This is not nostalgia. It is mechanics. You are not the aftermath of something that vanished. You are the continuation of something that never stopped being consistent. This is where discomfort turns philosophical. If the past is not gone, then identity is not a snapshot. It is a trajectory, a path that exists as a whole even if you only experience one point at a time. You feel like you are moving forward, leaving versions of yourself behind. But physics does not recognize those versions as discarded. They are earlier points in the same structure. not failed drafts, not deleted files. This doesn't mean they are active. It doesn't mean they can reach out or intervene. It means they were never removed from the description. And that matters, because it reframes responsibility, causation, and meaning. You cannot fully say, that is no longer me, because nothing in the universe performed that erasure for you. You also cannot say, I am trapped by the past, because continuation is not imprisonment. It is coherence. Feynman once said that nature uses only the longest threads to weave her patterns, not because she prefers complexity, but because nothing ever quite lets go. The universe does not advance by throwing things away. It advances by accumulating constraint. And you are one of those constraints. You are not perched at the present, watching reality scroll by. You are embedded in a history that physics refuses to delete. That is not comforting. It does not offer closure, but it offers something stranger, awe. Because if the past has not really gone away, then reality is thicker than experience. And you are not a moment passing through it. You are a shape carved into it.